Imagine coming home on New Year's Eve, expecting warmth, quiet, maybe a movie, only to find your entire parking lot hijacked by strangers who don't care about you, your family, or your property. Now imagine stepping out into freezing Chicago wind, watching clouds of breath drift in front of you, and suddenly knowing exactly how to deliver a revenge so cold. It literally locked every one of their cars in a sheet of ice. That's exactly what happened to me. And trust me, by sunrise, they regretted everything. If you've ever been disrespected, ignored, or walked all over by people who think they can take advantage of you just because you're too nice, hit that like button, subscribe, and settle in. Because today, you're about to hear one of the coldest, most satisfying revenge stories I've ever lived through, and justice never felt so crisp. For as long as I can remember, our family lived in a small pocket of the Chicago suburbs, where the houses stood like tired old soldiers, 3 flats, on both sides of the road stretching for almost a mile. These buildings were old, familiar, predictable. Most didn't have parking. Most basements smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old paint. And most of the people respected each other, at least enough to leave what little space we had alone. But our place was different. My parents had bought 2 of these buildings decades earlier, each with 3 apartments. We lived in 2 units ourselves, renting out the other 4. Unlike the cramped buildings around us, our lot extended a bit wider, a bit deeper, giving us a luxury nearly unheard of in that neighborhood, parking for 16 cars. For years, this extra land wasn't just convenience. It was peace. Our tenants appreciated it. We appreciated it. Everything worked like an unspoken agreement. You respect our property, and we respect yours. But like every story of revenge, everything changes the moment someone decides they're entitled to what isn't theirs. The first time we saw a car that didn't belong to us parked in our lot, we brushed it off. Maybe a friend of a tenant. Maybe someone confused. But then it happened again, and again, until one day, after seeing yet another strange car sitting comfortably in our lot as if it had paid rent, I felt something tightening inside me. That familiar burn in the chest, the feeling of being disrespected in your own home. I walked outside and decided enough was enough. If they wanted to use my property, fine. But they weren't leaving until they explained themselves. So I parked behind them, blocking them in. An hour passed, then another. And just when I thought I'd have a conversation, the guy stormed out, a tall, angry man with the swagger of someone who believed the world owed him space. No apology. No explanation. He jumped in his car, revved the engine like he wanted to intimidate me, and then, before I could say a word, he drove straight across our bushes, ripping across the yard and tearing out onto the street. I stood there stunned, fists clenched, heart pounding, feeling the sting of humiliation and disbelief crawl up my throat. My property, my bushes, my home. And he didn't give a damn. Naturally, I called the cops. But the officer shrugged, sympathetic but helpless. "It's private property," he said. "We can't do much unless he comes back." That answer lingered like cold air in my lungs. It wasn't anger anymore. It was helplessness. That spiraling sense of injustice, when you know someone wronged you but the system shrugs and tells you to deal with it. But I wasn't the type to just let things go. So I did the next best thing, called a towing company. Within 24 hours, bright reflective tow-away signs went up around the lot. The message was clear: park here illegally, and you'll watch your car disappear behind a tow truck. And for months it worked. Peace returned. The parking lot stayed clean. The bushes grew back. That brief chaos faded into memory, until the night everything exploded again. New Year's Eve should feel magical, festive, joyful. Even if you don't celebrate, the night has a certain energy, a city buzzing, families preparing, laughter echoing somewhere in the distance. But that particular New Year's Eve, as I turned onto our street, something felt wrong immediately. The headlights swept over a sea of vehicles, cars jammed in every space, squeezed in crooked angles, parked in the middle of the lot, and even blocking the street itself. It wasn't just full. It was chaos. Every single parking spot, including the ones clearly marked, was taken by strangers, people I had never seen before. Engines still warm, music pumping from one car, and not a single one belonged to us or our tenants. My heart dropped, then quickly rose into a furious heat. I stepped out of my car, and the first breath I took reminded me how cold it was below zero, the kind of cold that makes your eyelashes stiffen. But the anger kept me warm. My boots crunched on fresh snow as I walked deeper into the lot, counting cars, recognizing none of them, and feeling a deep, sharp betrayal. Someone had invited these people. Someone had used our lot as if it were theirs. And I already had a suspect, the same guy who drove through our bushes months earlier. I called the towing company immediately, my voice tight with frustration. But the dispatcher sighed apologetically. "We're slammed tonight. Holidays, drunk drivers. You know how it is. It'll be hours before we can send someone. Hours. By then, these people would be back in their cars and gone, leaving us with nothing but crushed snow and footprints." I hung up the phone, anger vibrating under my skin. I stared at the cars, engines cooling, metal gleaming under the streetlights. And then a thought slid into my mind so smoothly it felt like fate itself whispering, "If I can't tow them, I can freeze them." I walked to the back of our building, icy wind cutting across my face, and unlocked the shed. The smell of cold metal and old tools drifted out. There, in the corner, lay the sprinklers and hoses we used in summer. A grin crept up my face. The plan was wild, ridiculous, maybe even petty, but completely legal, and perfectly fitting for the disrespect they had shown. I dragged the hoses out, fingers stiff from the cold, and connected them. But water outside would freeze instantly, locking the hose itself. I needed hot water. So I threaded the hose through the basement window, into the laundry room, and attached it to the hot water tap. The moment I turned it on, steam puffed into the cold air. And that's when the excitement began to build in my chest. Not anger, now anticipation. 3 sprinklers. 3 zones. A plan fueled by cold justice. The moment the sprinklers started, the transformation began. Hot water shot upward, arcing through the air, instantly turning into a glittering mist of ice crystals. Within minutes, the closest cars began to frost over thin sheets at first, then thicker, harder layers as the temperature worked its magic. The parking lot became a silent battlefield. I moved slowly, carefully, adjusting each sprinkler every half hour. The cold bit into my bones. My gloves stiffened. The ends of my hair froze. But I kept going, fueled by every memory of disrespect, every moment of helplessness that these people had put me through. I sprayed the ground, watching it turn glassy and dangerous. I sprayed the cars, across windshields, along doors, around tires. Each pass added another layer. I walked to the windows and aimed, the hose directly between the seals. And the glass, letting thin rivulets sink in before freezing shut like welded metal. I crouched and targeted door locks, watching ice form inside them, expanding just enough to jam every mechanism. Grills froze, wipers froze, mirrors froze. And the longer I worked, the deeper the sense of satisfaction grew. Not revenge out of cruelty, but revenge out of justice. Revenge for being dismissed, ignored, trespassed, and treated like nothing. Hours passed. The world grew quiet. Midnight came and went, far from celebration. Just me and the soft hissing of sprinklers. By the time I turned off the water, the parking lot looked like a sculpture garden. Every car glistened under the street lamps, frozen solid in thick, glassy layers. The ground itself was a skating rink. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, watching my work twinkle. It was beautiful, peaceful, perfect. Then I coiled the hoses, tucked everything away, and went inside, warmth finally returning as I stepped into the house. I crawled into bed with the sweetest satisfaction I had felt in months, and I slept like a man who knew justice was already on its way. At around 4 in the morning, I woke to pounding, violent, desperate, the kind of pounding that shakes the whole front door. Then the doorbell rang, again, then more pounding. Voices rose outside, angry, panicked, freezing in the night air. I glanced at the clock, then at my parents, who were already awake, sharing the same amused expression I felt growing inside me. We stood quietly in the dark hallway, listening to the frantic yelling outside. Shouts like, "It's frozen solid," and "It won't open," and "Who the hell did this?" drifted through the cold air. Someone yelled that their keys were stuck. Another said the door wouldn't budge. Someone else slipped on the ice, screaming in frustration. But we didn't open the door. We didn't respond. We simply picked up the phone and called the cops. "We have trespassers in our lot," I said calmly. "They're damaging property and causing a disturbance." The VOA operator didn't even question it. 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed across the ice-covered cars. I opened the door with a polite smile as the officers walked up, already suppressing their laughter. They took one look at the lot, at the frozen cars, the furious owners, the glistening ice coating every inch, and one officer let out a quiet, "Holy crap!" The officers asked the crowd why they were there. The group of strangers shouted over one another, blaming the cold, blaming us, blaming the situation, until the truth finally came out. They were all guests of the same guy, the same idiot who had driven through our bushes months earlier. He had told them they could park here, that it was fine, that it was practically public. My jaw tightened, but inside, a warm tide of vindication surged. The officer turned to me, eyebrows raised. "That true?" I pointed at the clearly visible tow-away signs. "This is private property." They ignored the signs and trespassed. And they woke my entire family at 4 a.m. by pounding on our home. The officer nodded slowly, then turned back to the crowd. "Move your cars," he ordered, or they'll be towed. Someone yelled, "We can't." They're frozen. And that was the moment the officers finally laughed openly, loudly, helplessly. It didn't matter. Legally, the signs were up. Legally, I had every right to have these cars removed. And legally, the cops could ticket each car with my permission. So I gave it. One by one, in the freezing night, each illegally parked car was ticketed. And because none of them could even open their doors, let alone start their engines, tow trucks soon arrived to collect the cold, solid, ice-covered evidence of their stupidity. As the sun finally began to rise, the lot looked like a melted battlefield. Tow trucks rumbled off one by one, dragging away frozen blocks of metal. The angry crowd dispersed, shivering and defeated. Some slipped on the ice again while trying to leave on foot. Others cursed the guy who had told them they could park there. But one thing was crystal clear: their arrogance had consequences. And those consequences came in the coldest form imaginable. The best part wasn't the tickets. It wasn't the towing fees. It wasn't even the chaos of watching grown adults slip on ice while screaming at the universe. No, the best part was the silent shift in the neighborhood afterward. People whispered about the ice incident for years. The man who had caused all of this avoided eye contact whenever he passed by. Word spread fast and wide. Don't mess with that family's property. And not a single stranger ever parked in our lot again. Looking back now, the revenge wasn't about the ice. It wasn't about punishing people for one night. It was about reclaiming something deeper, the feeling of being respected in your own home, being heard, being valued, being treated like your property matters. And sometimes the universe doesn't give you justice, so you create your own. Even if it involves a hose, 3 sprinklers, and the coldest night of the year. Sometimes people only learn when consequences hit them in a way they never forget. And while revenge isn't always the answer, standing up for yourself absolutely is. Respect isn't something you beg for. Sometimes you freeze it into existence. If this story gave you chills literally or emotionally, hit that like button, subscribe for more insane revenge tales, and tell me in the comments, what's the pettiest, most satisfying justice you've ever seen? Trust me, I might just turn your story into the next video.